Thanks for having me. My name's David Bartlett. I'm sort of fairly new to this group. Not so new to radios, but yeah, I'm fairly new to you guys, so a lot of faces I don't know. My wife Sky, who you're probably familiar with some of her Facebook posts, she's not here today. As I said, she's nursing our injured dog, trying to keep Phoebe at bay. I thought I'd just do a bit of a talk on sort of where I've come from and some of the things we do in the repair of radios. So if I move along, not going to work. So I'm from a little town called Toogabbie in Gippsland, sort of just north of Traralgon. Nice little country town, in the foothills. Sort of, not a town you'd ever stop at. You'd probably pass through it on the way to Hayfield or Lacola or Maffra or somewhere like that. And I look after an electrical workshop at Electel in Traralgon, which you'll drive past if you're heading through to the lakes or to East Gippsland. We sort of do a lot of electrical repairs in there, motor rewinds and a few other things, a bit of a dying art. So that keeps me busy during the week. That's a bit about me personally. Radios. It all started with a little HPM, which just looks like that. Dad had one of these on the bench in the workshop when I was a little tacker. I think it came out of the tip. It never had a case or anything. It was purely just a radio that was just like that. No speaker, just had you had a bit of wire with a 6x9 hanging on a nail, and that just used to play the football and that on a weekend. It was never very reliable because it was we never had two bob to rub together, so it was something Dad used to tinker with a lot, and it just fascinated me. This thing on the bench glowing with strings and the dial lamps that sort of lit up like Christmas. It was just something that's sort of still vivid to me to this day, and it never sat there for long. I think it was probably 2 or 3 years, and then it disappeared. But it was just something I always remembered, and as I said, I see those chassis today, and it's sort of I light up when I see them. An early career in TV destruction. This is where it all began for me. In the late 70s, and I reckon I would have been 3 or 4. It was sort of a period, late 70s. Colour TV had been out for, a number of years, 74. So people were slowly starting to buy colour TVs, and a lot of the time was either trade-ins or when a set had failed. There was a massive influx of 50s and early 60s TV sets that were just being scrapped. And Dad, being who Dad was, grew up through the war, waste not, want not, they all come home. And it was never for the fact of them still being TVs, he just was resourceful. So he just had to keep the cabinets, and a lot of our early furniture was made out of the cabinets. And I used to have the job of pulling them to bits, and I just used to have a ball. I'd just scrap TV after TV, just pulling chassis out, tuners. I'm still fascinated with tuners, the intricacy of the tuning mechanisms. And I just did a lot of that, pulling wood screws out of all the cabinets, which they were in those days, all timber screwed together. So there's not too many early chassis. I don't know their models or their necessarily their makes, but not too many I don't recognise. So I sort of see them, and I'm not into TVs today. I'd probably get an early one, a Philips or a Healing or something, but just for memory's sake. But that's sort of, I did a lot of that early on. We even had the tinted glasses out of the AWA sets. They used to have a tinted glass in the front, and I think our back porch had them as windows at one stage. Dad even made a couple of skylights on the roof out of those. And I've still got, I'd have 20 of those sitting at home. I don't want to throw them out. I think I might make a coffee table or something out of them one day. I don't know. So yeah, so going through childhood, I destroyed everything that I come in possession of. Tape players. I got given a nice little HBN Astor transistor that I think I had that for a week before I destroyed it. And I come back across this early HPM chassis that Dad had in the shed. It was buried under the house in dirt. And it was just covered in birdseed, and I didn't give a lot of thought to it. But I used to spend a bit of time down on Chapel Street in Melbourne with the music shops, the guitar shops and things like that. And I used to visit Resurrection Radio down there, and I used to be a bit of a highlight going in there and seeing some of the stuff on display. And I was talking to Sean about it, and he mentioned that, you know, I've got cabinets and knobs for those things if you ever want to get it going. So I sort of thought it was a bit beyond it, and I didn't know whether I had the nous to do it. But I went home and had a bit of a play, and yeah, did a few things to it. With that, yeah, I had to rewire the hole underneath. Obviously, the rubber being sitting on dirt, the rubber wiring was shot. And I think I had to change a 6U7 and found a speaker for it. And anyway, after doing a few things, caps changed, it all come to life and it ran quite well. I was quite surprised really, because I didn't even need a speaker transformer. There was no insulation on it anymore. It was the secondary winding was exposed, but it worked quite well. So off I went back down to Resurrection with my chassis under my arm, and Sean found me a cabinet for it and some knobs, and yeah, and that got a lot of use at home. That sat beside my bed for years, and there's a bit of a bedside radio, and it sits at work now beside my desk. So yeah, it's sort of probably this early radio stuff sort of started with me doing that. That was my first sort of repair from there. With that, I moved into a lot of things. I played with cars, I played with lawnmowers, anything that was mechanical or electrical I pulled apart or played around with. Well, I moved into amplifiers. I thought I'd have a play with, I love music, I love listening to music and playing music, so I thought I'd have a look at some amps, and this one was one that was published in Radios and Hobbies. I'm not sure the year because I was stuff's a mess at home and I couldn't find the original article. I'm thinking 1955, something like that. It might be a bit later, but they put an article together for a very basic amplifier, 6V6 outputs with just single-ended. I'm not even sure what those preamps are because I had a look, and in one side I've got a 6SJ7 and in the other I've got a 6SK7. So I've only just noticed that, but yeah, so I built one of those, and that really started an interest in amplifiers because it sounded, despite being very basic, it actually sounds wonderful. It's got a lovely, just a lovely sound, and it's got variable control. One of those controls in the front is for variable feedback, and it gives you a good understanding how negative feedback works in an amplifier and how it shapes the sound. So from there I went sort of go a bit bigger. So I went to a similar sort of design, but moving to an 807 valves for a bit more power. And they always look nice with those grid caps on top, I reckon. So I thought I'd go a bit bigger, and this was a bit more of a custom build. I don't know where the circuit come from. I think I just sort of generated it myself. They're not overly complicated. I utilised an Astor TV power transformer. A lot of these things I built were just using bits I had lying around. So the transformers, I don't know where they were sourced from, but I just wound them myself to the specs they needed to be. And that's another amplifier that sounds really nice, and that Dad had that at home for years, using that for his LPs, and that's another amp that sounds quite nice. With that, I had to go bigger again. So back to the Radio and Hobbies design, and I sort of tried to copy this one pretty closely. And this I built with some really big transformers, really big ones I wound, and another transformer from a TV. I think that's a Healing TV transformer I used. But yeah, so that's a really nice amp, powerful, quite clinical sounding, not as musical as some of the single end ones I've built, but it's still a lovely amp. Tried different valves in it. Modern valves aren't quite built like the old ones. I tend to find the modern ones were red plating a little bit because of, I had probably the voltage a bit high and bias current a bit high, but I think I ended up putting KT 88s in it. That's the one of the output transformers that have just been hand wound. Really big. I think they're a 1 inch by 2 inch stack. So they're quite a big transformer. And that one I still use today. That's in my, I have that in my sort of bit of a music studio I've got at home. It powers a couple of studio monitors because it's a really clinical sounding amp, quite detailed and very linear in its sound. So yeah, where to go from there? I thought I'd try something crazy. Thought I'd build a big amp utilising some GM70 transmitting triodes from the Cold War. So, and I don't even know, I think I was just Googling on the net and stumbled across them. So I ordered some in from the Ukraine and they were a lovely big bottle, graphite plates, and they do light up like Christmas. They're a 60 watt filament. I think they're 20 volts, 3 amps each. Yeah, so that had some challenges in itself. Obviously, plate voltage is around 950 volts. So to make it, a lot of people have built them, but to make it integrated so that it's all on one amp, on one chassis was a bit involved. So what do you use for driver tubes? Don't remember. They were Russian too. They were just triodes, but they were sort of took a lot more current than like a 12AX or something like that. Yeah, so there's not a lot going on underneath. A bit of a preamp circuit for each signal, but there is 4 power supplies. Obviously, the 950 volts for the outputs. I've got a lower HT for the driver stage. Just your normal 6.3 AC filament, and then a regulated 20 volt supply for the filaments for the outputs. So, and that's the one that's been in my lounge room for however long. It's been there as long as you've been live, hasn't it, Em? So it's, yeah, so it gets a lot of use, that one, and keeps us warm on cold nights too, because it does dissipate a lot of heat. So, and it weighs a tonne. It's about 43 kilos, something like that. So it's once you put it down, you don't move it. But as I said, it was more just a crazy design, and it does sound good. It sounds wonderful. So I don't know whether if you're into music and whether you've listened to single-ended amplifiers. I just find they add something to the music that push-pull sort of doesn't. So is that 25 watts, 30 watts? Yeah, I've never measured it. I would say it's somewhere around that 20 to 30 watts, yeah. So probably closer to 20, because I did keep a lot of people run around 1200 volts for plate supplies. It's starting to get a bit high for me. I get a bit nervous. So I wasn't too happy with that. I kept it under 1,000. So I even put the filter caps, I hid them in the top can with the transformers in case I didn't know whether they're going to explode or what they're going to do. So I've sort of got 3 in series and sort of balanced it that way, and used some Corona wire for linking it back, and probably a bit of an overkill, but I didn't know what I was dealing with. So, but it's been very reliable and it works well. I've also moved on to a few guitar amps, which I explored with, trying different things, and a lot of these were pulls from old radiograms and TVs again. That one there, I built using the innards of those Astor tablegrams, the ones with the Bakelite cabinet with the slanted front. I'm not sure what they were called, but I had one of those that had been dropped and broken, and a few Phillips handles from portables. So it's just making use of junk you got lying around and putting it to good use. So I tried to keep a lot of Australian designs. These two here, I've sort of used some early Moody amp designs from Australia. So trying to keep it local. And then the last amp I sort of built was a 60 watt Playmaster 117 from Radios and Hobbies, utilising the 6DQ6 outputs. Something I've always wanted. I've tried buying them, but never sort of come across one. So I thought I'd have a go of making one, and here I'm just pressing a steel chassis up with just a homemade press I made, or just a bender, sheet metal bender. Just getting the chassis organised. And there it is with my components sort of laid out where I want the valves and the transformers I've wound. And just sort of having it sort of close to original as I possibly could. With that done, I then can go and punch the holes, drill them, paint it, and then I made some graphics up using a program on the computer called Front Design. Quite a good program for doing face plates and that sort of thing. Front Design is a company, I think, that makes plates for you. They've got a free program, so you draw the program up and then you send the design to them and they'll make it for you and send it back. But with that, you can use their program to make your own design and then print it to PDF. And I just sent that to a sign writer and they printed that for me on a clear film, and I stuck that on. So, yeah. And that is it finished. So it pretty well mimics as closely as possible the original. I tried to keep the layout as original as possible. A lot of long shielded leads floating around, which I sort of didn't like, and that was part of the original design. But it's actually very quiet. It's actually a really quiet amp, amazingly. And yeah, it works really well. I had to have a little opto coupler thing hiding in an old can from a capacitor, which was for the vibrato. But yeah, that's a really nice guitar amp, and I don't use it that often because it's a bit loud, but it sits there out with my other amps, and yeah, I've now got one. Radios. Good old COVID, eh? With COVID come, I still had work. I was lucky in that regard, but obviously not being able to go away from home, I had a lot of extra time on my hands. And I was sort of always looking, I'd done a lot of radios sort of in the interim, but I was looking for something. I'd just buy radios and repair and polish them, and that was it. But I was looking for something a bit extra to do. And I've seen this one on eBay, $35, and it had these brakes. But I didn't think too much. I thought this would be easy enough to push back together and fix up. There's a crack here. But with that, I thought it's got its knobs. The dial glass is good. We should be able to do something with that. So with that, yeah, we basically gave it cleaned it all up, gave it a paint job, and very early on the piece, I wasn't taking a lot of photos, so I never got much of the process, but and that's sitting over there. But yeah, just gave an old derelict thing a new lease of life. It was really clean inside. There wasn't much needed in that regard. Yeah, I think it ran for a month and then started developing faults, which I think was just the mica capacitor, which I had to change again. But yeah, so that just, I thought it looks a bit toyish with the white bands in the knobs, but it was just something to dress it up a little bit and perhaps make it look what it's not. But yeah, that sort of started the ball rolling with me. I sort of got the itch after that. I sort of went looking for derelicts that I could maybe bring back to life. Bit of my workshop. This is my space where I do most of my repairs from. I'm sort of lucky, I've got a fair bit of space. I'm on half an acre where I built a nice workshop with about 6 metres by 6 metres of space. So I've got this nice bench area here where I do most of my assembly and disassemblies and work on them. Don't have a lot, I've got a fair bit of equipment hidden in cabinets. I don't have much on display. I don't use oscilloscopes much. I don't, a lot of other stuff I don't sort of bother too much with. I just basically have the bare minimum to get them working as they should. Some other tools I use a little bit of, especially with radios. Top left-hand corner, I've got my grout winding machine, which I'm very lucky to have. I don't have that at home, that sits at work, but it's a wonderful old machine. It's made in Sydney, and it does a wonderful job at spinning up transformers pretty quickly. It's got a traverse feeder up here, which I can quickly dial in, and I can spin up speaker transformers and that in a matter of minutes on that. It works really well, and yeah, I was sort of lucky to have that. My couple of grinding wheels, I have just a wire buff wheel for cleaning up bolts, sort of got to have that. A flapper wheel, like a cloth flapper wheel for polishing Bakelite knobs and that sort of thing. And then my other grinder is just a normal grinding stone, and then one of these belt sanding attachments, which I use a lot of. It gets a hiding, that just for tidying up little things. A sandblast cabinet, which is always nice for getting rid of rust on heavily pitted stuff. I don't use it that much. I find it sort of pits metal and makes metal sort of hard to clean up once it's done. It sort of, it sort of adds a texture to the metal that I don't always like. So if it's really rusty, I'll use that, but otherwise it doesn't get a lot of use. My old 60s, I don't know what brand it is, Alto is it? Jointer, sort of saw and planer, which gets a lot of work with cabinet repairs when I'm making baffles or replacing panels on radios. So I'm lucky I've got a lot of, with all these old TVs that we used to pull apart, I've kept a lot of the sides out of them, so I've got a lot of veneer and that I've got stacked away, so quite often I can make different parts and pieces up with that. And then the drill press, which is just always handy to for different things, drilling out holes for whatever reason. So you're always using a drill with radios. I picked up this, Sky went and got it for me, this little lathe. It's made by Sherline. I'd never seen one before. And yeah, they're made here in Melbourne, I think. It's a little bit of a toy, it's only this big, but she brought it home, and it's a wonderful little gadget for turning brass for knobs, or extending shafts or trimming things down. Or recently I had to cut a tuning gang from a double down to one. I wanted to cut the back end off it, so I just had to remachine the end of the shaft to take the ball bearings and that. So it's a great little thing. It's something that I don't know how to use it. I'm not a fitter and turner, but it's just handy to have there. My tap and dies, all my Imperial Whitworth threaded taps and dies, would be really lost without those. So I don't even know if you can buy them new anymore, all those sort of Imperial threads, I don't know, but yeah, it gets a lot of use. And my wax pot, which I find really useful for dipping, if I'm repacking old capacitors and that. I find if I just dip them in that wax, and then it just makes them look old again. And a lot of old cotton covered wire which starts to look a bit frayed or starting to discolour and look weathered, you can sort of just soak it in that wax, and it sort of makes it all look quite new again, and sort of helps it, I don't know, just secures it a bit better and stops it falling apart, I suppose. And yeah, so, and that's just beeswax. I don't think it's as quite as, I think it's got a lower melting point than, what's the other wax they use, paraffin? Yeah, so it's, but yeah, it gets a hiding that as well. So even old speaker transformers that I'll, looking a bit ratty on a set, I'll quite often just seal them over with some hot wax. I'll just have a paintbrush in it and just put it, paint the transformer with it, and just use a heat gun to sort of melt it in and seal it off. So I just find that's really good for preserving those sort of things. That's my test bench. I made that a few years ago. Probably a bit over the top, but it's just where I can just plug a radio or whatever in. I've got just my power. I can switch my variac in and out of the circuit. I've got an isolation transformer in there as well, which I can switch in and out, and obviously the bulb limiter on top to switch in and out. And everything I do sort of runs through that. And I've got this just a magnetic off-on switch like on a grinder. I find that really useful because when you're starting, I don't use the variac much. I'm not one to wind radios up. I plug them in, turn them on, bulb limiter, off I go. But what I find is if they've got a short and that bulb wants to light brightly, well, that contactor won't hold in. So if I push the button and normally it clunks in and that's it, but if I push it and it wants to come out with me, I sort of think, I've got a fault here. Or if it's a radio or a larger set with a larger transformer and it takes a little bit more to start up, and I might just hold it in for a moment or two. But I find that quite useful. And the other thing is if a fault develops when I've started a radio up and it's running on the bulb limiter, all of a sudden the bulb starts to get brighter and brighter, and then all of a sudden it's taking all the voltage and it'll drop that out. So it's quite a handy sort of safety feature, which I didn't design into it, but it sort of works well with that. Cabinet repairs. So some of the stuff I use for my cabinets, a lot of my cabinets I glue. When I've got cracks in that, I pretty much gluing everything back with Loctites, or with super glues, I should say. I find epoxies sort of don't go hard enough, and there's always that bit of creep or movement, and cracks sort of can reappear. So I find, and super glue, this 406 I use, goes off pretty quick, and it's very thin, so you can hold joints together, cracks together, and hold them tightly and pour it along it, and it'll wick in, and then it sort of sets it there. And then you can, if you've got masking tape or something holding the crack together, then within 5 or 10 minutes you can pull that off, and it's held the joint really tight. And then because it sort of stays quite wet, you can mop off the excess with a rag, and I just find it's a really good glue for Bakelite cracks. It works really well, and if the cracks are clean, it's a really strong bond. The Loctite 554 here, that's a similar glue, but it's a thick glue, so it's not as thin, so it's handier when you've got joints that don't quite meet up, or if you've got porous materials like timber, and that it works very well at gluing those things together as well. There is just my 2-part epoxy I use, which is just a casting resin. It's just 50-50 hardener and compound. I could use that for filling voids or whatever. It's just clear, so I'll colour that with tints and whatever else to try and match the material I'm filling. I'm still not comfortable using that on Bakelite. I find it's in its cured state, it's still too soft. So I'm sort of exploring other options there. With my timber cabinets, I'll move on to my timber cabinets in a minute. For filling Bakelite, obviously your automotive bog, some fiberglass, some wet and dry paper, some steel wool. I don't think you can get this anymore. I think they've gone under, unfortunately. And I use a lot of automotive products, so all my paints and that is all automotive fillers and primers and sanding primers and that sort of thing, all from your Auto Barn. This primer surface is really good stuff. It's just like it's a primer that's got a high build, so it's got a lot of material in it, so when you spray it over a repair joint, it builds quickly, and then it goes off quickly, so within an hour or two it's ready to sand. But because it's got a nice build, it allows you to sand it down and feather the edges and get a really smooth surface with minimal effort. So, yeah. For my timber cabinets, similar sort of thing. A big thing I like to use is this KBS paint stripper for getting old varnishes and that off. I was just using the Sally's stripper, is it, or not sure what it's called. I was getting it in Bunnings, but I found it was darkening a lot of the veneers. So I now use this KBS, which is a gentler type of stripper, but works really well, and I don't find any darkening of veneers. It works really nice, and that I just got from Crowe's. And then I just have my normal paint fillers, PVA glues, which I use, I haven't got on there, sandpapers. I'm lucky enough I've got a space where I can spray my cabinets, and I use, most of the time I use Stylewood or the Miratone for my finishes, which is the old-fashioned pre-cat type lacquer, which they were originally sprayed in. I just like using it because it's a lacquer that goes off very quickly. You can spray it and then within 10 minutes spray it again and build surfaces. It sands easily, and if you do get a run, you only got to wait half an hour or so, sand it out and then go again. But it's got a lovely finish on timber, and yeah, it sort of pulls back nice. So the two sets over there, one's in a gloss, the Phillips is in like a semi-gloss. Yeah, so there's not much. Danish oil is another one. Doesn't get a lot of mention, Danish oil, but if I didn't have the equipment to spray in that, I'd probably even just try doing a cabinet in Danish oil. It's easy to use. I quite often use it before putting the lacquer on. I'll quite often wipe a cabinet over with Danish oil as a bit of a sanding sealer, but it's quite a nice finish that's easily applied. So yeah. All right. So yeah. So the HMVs, they do up nice. They're an attractive set. This one here was the blue one was the first one I did, which appeared in Radio Waves. And then I was lucky enough with that publication, a gentleman, Bruce Walsh, emailed me. Do you know Bruce? No? I don't know whether he's local or not. He sent me a donor so I could do a yellow one. And after the yellow one, I thought I'd find myself a red one. So I'm not sure where that one come from, probably eBay. But I like the ones without the supports in them. So I thought I'd get a nice red one. With that red one, when I got it home, and I knew from the photos from the listing, the top bar was missing from the grill. And I sort of looked around to see what I could fill it in with. I tried some Bakelite. I had some Bakelite I tried cutting down on the saw. It's really hard stuff to work with Bakelite. It wants to chip and break and carry on. So I thought timber would be my next option. And I had some old material, some old floorboards, red gum floorboards that come off an old house in Paynesville that was demolished. And I thought I'd try that, so I ripped a piece of that down. It's a really tight, fine grain. And yeah, I rebaited the back so the glass could fit in, sort of shaped it so it'd roughly fit in. These little parts here, I just filed the broken parts of the Bakelite, sort of smoothed them over the rat's tail file to get them sort of smooth, then shaped the end of the timber to sort of match it closely. Left the whole thing a bit proud, left the ends a bit proud so I could sand them later, and then I glued that in, and I used that 454, that gel type super glue to hold that in, and then let that go off. And then after I did that, I did sand it smooth, got it levelled. Used a bit of automotive putty just to tidy up those little voids in these corners here, and just filled them in, and then put some of that primer surface, which is that heavy build primer. And because the rest of the cabinet's good, I don't want to spray the whole lot of it in it because I'm only going to have to sand it all down. And because it is a heavy fill primer, you lose a lot of detail in the cabinet. So I thought I'd just repair the broken part. And then I've just sanded it down. Once again, I've just feathered these edges over, got them quite smooth, got this line across the front fairly consistent. And then before the colour, I've just put another coat over it just to cover that timber over again, because I don't know how the timber's going to go with colour directly on it. It's likely to be a bit porous and suck it in, so I've just put another coat over it to seal that up. And then I've applied the colour. So I've just got, it's just a nice red with a white speckle I've put through it. Which I do at the same time. I use just a red spray paint, and while it's wet I just put a dusting of white over it and just sort of let it sit into the paint and sort of back and forth with the red and the white until I got the effect I like. And then I used a clear coat over the top to seal it over and just sort of help it all melt down to a smooth finish. A couple others that I've painted along the way. That was a little air zone that we did in a blue in a similar style. That had some cabinet damage as well that was repaired in a similar fashion. It worked, Emily. A bit of a crazy green one. This had a broken grill section. These here were broken. I think that was cracked, that was missing. Same thing, just filled that in, gave that a paint job. Had to make a new glass for that. A red Stromberg Strauss, which that wasn't actually broken, just had a lot of hairline cracks in that one, which I was able to just put the super glue on from behind and it wicked through and set them all solid. And then a little Philco midget, which I think that come from Belgrade for $20. Cabinet was quite good, but the louvers were broken. These louvers were broken on the top. It was a strange set because it was one that someone had been into at the back, but it was like a child had been into it because every screw had been removed out of it. But the thing hadn't been disassembled. It just been undone, everything been undone, and it was all still sort of sitting in place. So. And that was the last one I did a couple of weeks ago, which is we had a bit of a wrecked Mickey case, and I did this for a friend, and I actually experimented by putting some timber stain down first with an airbrush, and sprayed the timber stain directly onto the original Bakelite cabinet, and then putting just a white acrylic lacquer over the top, and the timber stain bled through and gave that bit of a effect. So and it came up quite nice. So it's a process I'll experiment a bit more with. But and they're the paints I'm using. So they're just your in your Autobarns or your Super Cheaps. It's just these duplicate colours. Just these are the colours. That's the clear coat I've been putting on top, which you don't always need clear coat. I just put it on sometimes. This one here hasn't got any clear coat because I just felt it didn't need it. But it's a lovely paint, and it dries quickly, and it keeps all these original details. Like the paint shrinks down nicely, and it retains a lot of that original detail. So it's very good in that regard. My sad old Phillips. Bought this one on eBay a few years ago. Probably one of my braver purchases. I actually fought someone to the end for this one. I don't know why. There was two of us bidding pretty hard for this. Probably just a part of it that they wanted for something else, I'm guessing, I don't know. But I just liked it. It looked a bit different. But it was in a real mess. The cabinet was, a lot of the veneer had actually been sort of torn off, and a previous repair had sort of sanded it and just sort of painted it all brown. This front cabinet was loose to the sides, the base was loose, the top was loose, it was delaminating. The whole thing was sitting a bit wonky. This dial glass was broken. I sort of was a bit deflated when I got it. So it sat on the shelf for quite a while until I decided what to do with it. As I quite often do, I started with the speaker. It wasn't in bad shape, but it was just, this cone had gone very brittle. There's a bit of it missing, but you only had to touch it and it would crack, and it would... and the issue with that was the glue around the surround was completely gone. As you can see, it was just rust. So I figured I would have a go at reconing it. I don't know where you can get, or even if you can still get, these internal spiders, so I wasn't going to go messing with that too much, so I actually cut it out and left it quite intact in that part. And a good feature with these old speakers is they're all screwed together, so you can get them all apart and work on them quite easily. So my first attempt was to actually glue this original centre to a new cone. Which I've got a few 5-inch cones to suit roller speakers, and luckily most of them are the same, so you don't have any dramas. The only ones are the AWA and a few other, I think Stromberg Carlson. A few use the slightly bigger cone, but most of them, this cone sort of suits most repairs. So while that was gluing and drying, I put this through the sandblast cabinet, cleaned all the speaker parts up, found some nice Duplicolour green. It was almost a perfect match for the original Philips green, and started putting it all back together. Here I am centering the new cone into the magnets piece. I've just got some paper wedges just to go down between the voice coil and the magnet, just to centre it. I've just gingerly tightened that, not overly tight, and then I can then add a bead of glue around here and then fit the surround piece on afterwards, and just use some paper clamps to clamp and hold it in place. And with that, it was pretty well right to go. Glenn Orris, is it Glenn Orris? It is Glenn Orris, yep. So Sky messaged him. He made me up a nice new label for that. He also made a new dial. You can see that in that crack one. I got him to make a new one of those for that. So yeah, so that come up looking like new. So that sort of motivated me to get on with it. I thought with that looking like that, I could move on to the chassis. And the chassis, as horrible as it was on the top side, was actually remarkably clean and nice underneath. So I didn't want to go, I wanted to paint the top because of the mess it was in, but I didn't want to go stripping it all out, and then it's lost its originality, and you're bending wires and moving components that probably not going to be too happy if you do that with something that old. So we basically stripped the top off. These filter caps were easy to remove. The transformer was easy to remove because it was just all sort of soldered on through here. The IFs come off. We had a secondary one was an alloy, but the first IF was really heavy copper tin, really heavy copper shield. And it had this nice little shield on the top here. So they come off. This little tin box I removed, unsoldered the aerial and oscillator coils. And so I was just left with this bare cabinet with the valve sockets. I didn't want to undersolder them, so I've just undone the screws, lifted them up enough to get some paper underneath, and so I could sand the rust off. A lot of these leads, I didn't want to pull them through because I didn't want to bend them and break them, so I've just put some sleeving over them so they wouldn't get paint on them. And then I've just hand sanded all this, so I didn't want to sandblast or anything, so I've just hand sanded that down to look smooth. Got some rust converter, like a phosphoric type rust converter, and just rubbed that through the cabinet with some steel wool. and basically got it back to being pretty well a bright cabinet to where I could undercoat it. I don't always undercoat with something like this, but this chassis was quite pitted, so undercoat was there to sort of help fill up some of the rust and the pit marks. And then with that, I was able to spray it back green, so it was back to that original Phillips green, and cleaned up a few of the components with it. Obviously this cover here I sandblasted and painted. The transformer, undone the end bells and painted those. Cleaned up the valve sockets, polished up some nuts and bolts. The underneath was so nice, I ended up re-stuffing the caps. And they were that big, there was plenty of room to do it, so I wasn't going to put modern little caps in there. So, and there was only a handful anyway, so it's quite a basic circuit. Not much going on under there. So with that, I had a speaker and chassis pretty well ready to go. It fired up and worked as it should. No real issues. I just made a new Perspex glass here, and Glenn and Oris made the graphics for behind it. Luckily it wasn't printed on the glass, it was just a bit of paper behind it. These bright metal parts were just sandblasted, and then I just put some silver paint on those. But yeah, that come up a real treat. So with that chassis playing in the background, entertaining me, I thought I'd start playing with the cabinet. A real mess. I first sort of just cleaned it all off, dusted it all off, got all the dust and debris off it, and just started one piece at a time, because every joint was loose or broken, or it was just, it was out of square, the whole lot. So I'd just start by gluing all these, pouring glue into the joints, because everything was elevated, so I was able to get glue into the joints, and just start one piece at a time. Here I'm just clamping the front back down to the sides. Here I'm just doing the tops back down to the, because they were all lifted. The timber had started to delaminate around these corners, so I've just poured glue in under those and mopped up the excess and just used masking tape to pull them tight. Same with here, just gluing the bottom. So I just really spent some time just getting the cabinet back to a sound condition. Scraped off what remaining veneer was left on there, and that didn't take much effort, it just fell off, and sort of got it back to a cabinet that was actually quite sound. It got back to quite being usable. So I did a trial fit to see how it all went back together. Glued this little piece back in last. I found this top was sort of bowed in and sunken, so I put a timber brace under that just to level it up, and used some automotive filler just to sort of fill in some of these voids. Tried to get it as nice a surface as possible for the veneer to go on. And by this stage I was starting to get fairly motivated. It was starting to come along to a point where I could see I could get it finished reasonably well. The old speaker baffle was a bit worse for wear, it just become very dried out, and so while I was at it I cut a new one of those with some more old TV cabinet parts. Then I was up to veneering. It's pretty hard to get good veneer now, if there's nowhere to get it from. This come from a place in Queensland called Top Veneer, but I want to try and get something local, some Queensland maple or walnut or whatever they call it, but it's horrible. It's just not, the grain's just not what it used to be. So I ended up getting that's American walnut. It was the closest thing I could sort of get that I thought would suit it. The grain was fairly nice, and it had this sort of hollowed out bit which I thought would look nice over the front of the radio with a similar sort of pattern each side. this is a bit of an unconventional way of doing it, and I'm still not sure that I like doing it, but I tried an iron-on method with the veneer. So that's just a tight bond glue, which I think I got from Total Tools. And it was a process of coating the cabinet, the whole cabinet of the radio. I did 2 coats of that glue, which is, it's really just a PVA glue, but online a lot of people were using that tight bond brand, so I used that. So it was really a case of coating the whole radio cabinet in it, letting it dry, and then I did a second coat, letting it dry, and the same with the veneers. So the back sides of the veneers, I painted those with using a roller, a couple of coats of the tight bond glue. And the whole idea of that is the minute you put the two together and you put an iron over them, it melts the glue and the two surfaces bond. And for the most part, it worked pretty well. So here you can see where I've sort of started at this point. So I would have had the iron hot and I would have just started ironing here, sort of having the timber facing straight up, and I've just slowly worked the iron over this bend, sort of just shaping the timber over that bend. And the good point is once you've sort of done it, it stays there. So the timber, as you're working it, it's staying pressed down. So you haven't got wet glue where you're trying to clamp things. It's sort of, as you're ironing it, it's staying put. So I was able to just work the iron all the way through to the end, and then that was pretty well done. And it was a case of working my way. I sort of started with the front. I had some dramas with the front, which I'll talk about later, but I just sort of worked my way around doing each of the sides until I pretty well had the whole thing wrapped. I had some nice figured burl left over from another job, and I thought I'd just put them in there. I think originally they were just black strips, but I thought that'd look nice. The only issue I was continually having was this front piece would keep bobbling here. It would not sit down, and it was only because it was sort of hollowed and it would never stick. So I ended up having to do the front and the top with contact cement, which is not ideal because contact cement doesn't go off rock hard, and it allows for a little bit of movement. And as you can see over there now, there's you'll see there's a bit of checking in the veneer, and that's probably because there's movement there where it can move if it wants to. So whereas this other glue is rock solid, it sets very hard. So this whole process, as daunting as it looks, was actually quite simple. So once you just cut your veneer to size with scissors, and once I just would have overlap everywhere, and then I could sand the edges down with like these edges in the back. I could just sand down with a sanding block, and yeah. So it wasn't. I used a router in these little bits here, just a trimming router, just to trim that back to the original dimensions of the cabinet. But yeah, that worked. It worked really well. And this is the fun bit where I got to finish it. I stained this actually with a yellow stain, just to highlight a little bit. Coated the whole thing with that Danish oil I mentioned earlier. Just used a rag and just gave it a good coat of Danish oil, just as a bit of a sanding seal. It gets rid of the dust. That was sort of after I'd given it a nice sand down and got the whole thing smooth. And then I did all the black trim, which I just sprayed on with some black paint after sort of masked it all up, sprayed it on. And then I used some aqua coat, which I use as a grain filler. Pretty expensive stuff, but it's nice to use if you sort of want to get veneers nice and get grain very smooth. It's nice to use. You just put it on a spatula, or I use an old credit card, and you just sort of scrape it across the grain, sort of just scrape it in across, sort of like that across the grain, and it just sort of fills all the pores. And you can do 3 or 4 coats of that, and then you can get it to a state like this where it's very smooth and all the grain's sort of filled and it's ready to take your top coat. So after some sanding and Danish oil and the grain filling, I was ready to put some lacquer on it. And here I am just spraying the pre-catalyst lacquer that I use, the Stylewood, and just I think I probably got about 3 or 4 coats, just leaving 10 minutes between coats. And I was able to then just, the enjoyable part of assembling it and putting it all back together. Yeah, but that was quite a project, and probably my own most ambitious one. Lastly, if I've got time, Graham, I'll get
we'll make time.
You'll make time? Just a quick one. I've started experimenting with making moulds and knobs and things. It's quite easy and it yields excellent results. The secret of the product is this pinky seal. It's quite expensive, so you try and make your moulds quite small. You don't waste the stuff. But the detail is, it's easy to use, the detail is excellent. And yeah, it's a 2-part resin, I suppose, that sets into a silicon rubber. And yeah, just 50-50, stir it up, pour it into over your knob, over your mould that you made, and it's sort of ready to, it's sort of 20 minutes and it's ready to demould, so you can see what happens. I've just got a little bit of water pipe here, which I've cut a slit in, and that's where I start the process from. Got them over here. Yeah, so I'll start with that. I half fill that with plasticine. Then I'll sit my knob in there, and then I'll fill it with the resin. And by doing that, I usually make this bottom piece. I also put I'll make that piece. I also put some little holes in it so I can key the two together. And then once I've done the first side, I can then pour the opposite side. And the only thing that this stuff doesn't stick to anything. The only thing it sticks to is itself. So you need to put something around this rim before you pour on the top side. So the simplest thing is just Vaseline, just a thin layer of the Vaseline on that. Then I can pour the top side, and then with that I've got a nice mould. And yeah, it's the detail. If the knob's in good nick, the detail is excellent. So yeah, and I've done some others. Radiola badge for one of my little transistors, and a scutcheon for an air zone, and the actual resin I use I just use a 2-part epoxy resin for the knobs themselves, and the dyes I just got from Bunnings. So I've got all the colours there. You sort of learn, you start to keep a bit of a recipe book of what colours to get your browns and your ivories and whatever else. And then I've also recently got some other filling materials. So I got a bronze powder that you can use to add to the resin to make the scutcheon look real. I've got some black powder to make like a black Bakelite. Yeah, you just sort of got to experiment and try things. But and the good thing is once you've got the mould, you can make the knob part's really easy. You make as many as you like. It's quite a simple process. Just a couple more photos. So there's, I think I made this for George for a snail. So there's the starting process, just with the knob sitting there flush. Plasticine, I've put the little dimples in, mixed up the resin, poured it in, and then when I've demoulded it, it's looked like that. So then, as I said, I've just then painted this part in a Vaseline, so the next mould process doesn't stick to that. Put some little pipes in so I can pour the mould, and got some air releases. and then from that I've got I've got the that's where then I can then pour the mould. I make a little paper funnel here. I just make a little paper funnel, tuck it into one of them holes, pour the liquid in or pour the resin in until it comes out the other hole, and then just let that go off overnight. And as I said, excellent results. That's one I made for George for Peter Pan snail for the little side knob. And even just with, before I poured the mould, before I poured the knob with resin, I'd just get the paintbrush and just dabble bits of black stain in around, sorry, I've gone too far. Dabble bits of black resin in there just to give a little bit of a speckled effect. And that just gives me that sort of, I mean, it looks pretty good. It looks as good as Bakelite without being Bakelite, I reckon. And there's another one I did for another Peter Pan, and just some Aston Mickey knobs that I needed for repair quite recently. And the detail is really excellent. So, and it's quite a simple sort of process to do. So I almost enjoy getting a radio now with a knob missing. So it gives me something to do. So so that's it. No worries. Thank you. Thanks for listening to that. Sorry, Kevin.
I'm Kevin Poulter, you may.
Yes, I know you, Kevin.
May I respectfully suggest that members have to be careful with ventilation with moulding knobs. We have another member, Ray Hosking, that's been a bit affected by
Yeah, well, that could be the case. I haven't had many issues with what I'm using, but it's always, I meant to mention it with the spray painting process. Some of the paints that I'm using for those cabinets, incredibly toxic. And I'm lucky I've got a half an acre, I can do it outside but even the first couple I did without a mask, and I was ill for days. Like, it's the worst hangover, and it's dangerous stuff. But I've been lucky, Kevin. I haven't had any issues with the not yet. But I'm trying to experiment with different resins, so it's something I'll be mindful of. But the pinky seal's, I think, nearly odor-free, I think, but still something you've got to be wary of. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The red Chrysler, you've obviously spray painted the cabinet, but how did you preserve the yellow paint in the Chrysler brand?
Well, that Duco paint is wonderful at retaining detail. So so the whole lot got sprayed red, but it's unlike your spray paints you get from Bunnings and the like. The Duco shrinks back, so as it's drying and the thinners evaporates from it, it sort of shrinks back like Glad wrap and pulls back into all the details. So it retains all those little things. So the Chrysler would have been still quite prominent, that recess, and then I was just able to infill it with some yellow paint.
So you did that just by going back by hand?
Yeah, and I would have I would have just used water-based paint, something that wouldn't react with the Duco, and I would have just been quite liberal and put it all over it, and probably just a rag on the tip of my finger and just wiped it over and left the paint in the inlay, rather than sit there and try and, that's how I would have, probably took a couple of attempts, but that's how I would have got.
The only secret is using lacquers rather than enamel paint.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think you'll find the original radios, the ones that were painted in the day, they would have been lacquers. Yeah, they would have been, because it just covers nice, and it's night and day to use, but it is toxic. So I've got a mask now that I wear, but you just got to use even the little aerosols, those Duco cans. It's dangerous stuff. So you just got to have a mask on and work outdoors.
Follow-up question. I'll put my editor's hat on. Can we do an article on your knob moulding process?
I'd like to read that one too.
Yeah, probably can. Probably can. I probably need to. I probably need to make one and dissect it a little bit more and get some more. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I tend to rush things. I'm systematic in when I do stuff, but I tend to do it without a lot of thought process. And I'm halfway through before I realise I probably should have taken more photos, or I probably should have taken more notes. So, but no, definitely, I mean, we can do that. Yeah. So no, good.
Right, don't rush just afternoon tea. I'm going to thank David again, and then I'm going to call on Phil Brack to auction one particular item. Thank you, David.
Yep, no worries. Thank you.